So I'm gonna do a quick read of the first verses that we have already explained in the previous studies. From verse 1 says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day Elohim ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And Elohim blessed the seventh day and purified it," or in Hebrew the word there is kadash, from kadosh, to make, set apart. So he put that day apart from the rest, the seventh, because that in it he had rested from all his work which Elohim created and made. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that Yahweh Elohim made the earth and the heavens. There Yahweh adds his name. He adds his part to the creation when it comes to the perspective that is being given in the first chapter as Elohim, through the title Elohim and what that means, and then now with the name Yahweh, and showing a focus on humanity, and of course, like I have mentioned before, on mercy, while Elohim is focused on justice. So it was given the order in which things were created. Now, through mercy, we are seeing the reason why things were created. So it says, verse 5, "And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for Yahweh Elohim had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground." There was not a man to till the ground. Meaning, man did not have to work the land to get a harvest from it and eat from it. The land would just produce fruit and he would eat from that fruit. There is a thing regarding bread and what bread represents as actual food of men. So and how it's made, and through the harvest of the wheat, and how Messiah said that his flesh is the bread that we are supposed to eat, and it is bread of life, and a bunch of other things that are also important regarding that type of food that basically does not come as a fruit, but you have to work the actual wheat that you get from the harvest. So, but like I said, that work that brings the harvest is something that came to be through the eating of the knowledge, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So it says here, "But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And Yahweh Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." So Yahweh formed Adam. The word that is translated as men in Hebrew is Adam, is the actual name of the first man that was created. So one could say that the name of the first man was men. However, that is how they translate the word Adam. Adam is made, the name Adam is formed by three letters: Aleph, Dalet, and Mem. And those letters represent several things, but one of them is how he would be formed by a spirit, soul, and body. How some interpret Adam would come back as David and then as Mashiach, understood by the letters of the names of the persons I just mentioned. And also For instance, dam means blood. Edom, which was the name that was given to Esau because of the way he looked, or the nickname, Edom means red. And you can see the connection between Edom and Adam. Dam is blood, Edom is red. Adamah, which is just adding a letter Hey to Adam, is ground, or the soil of the ground. So men is may not gather all those meanings that I just mentioned from the word in Hebrew, which would be basically a person who was made from the dust of the ground, whose blood is red. And as we know, the life is in the blood, and the nefesh is in the blood. So it is a person made of the dust of the ground, whose blood is red and is alive. So that is basically part of what we can understand from the name Adam, which here is just read as men. So, and Yahweh Elohim formed Adam of the dust of the Adamah, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Yahweh sent the Neshama. It traveled like the Ruach, the spirit, like wind, enter the nostrils of men, which, like I have explained before also, that is why of the five senses, the smell is the most spiritual of them. And that's why Yahweh used the nose to send his neshama through his spirit into the body that he had formed from the dust of the ground, in order to create a nefesh, what is translated as soul. So Yahweh sent his spirit to create a soul into that body that he had formed as a golem, like we can find in the book of Psalms. David testifies that when Yahweh created Adam, he was just a body made from dust, made from clay, which had no life at all, until the Almighty sent spirit and Adam started moving and then eventually speaking. So another thing that I wanted to say, Yahweh sent the neshama, travel like the ruach, enter the nostrils. That's why also we have two parts, because it represents good and evil, or truth and false. It represents right and wrong, is what represents what we must use spiritually to discern between spirits. Because just like a spirit is invisible, a smell also cannot be seen. So through the nose you can see if a smell is good or bad. So in a spiritual nose you can see if a spirit is from Yahweh or is from error, from the lie, from Satan. So, and Yahweh Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And Yahweh Elohim planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground made Yahweh Elohim to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And a river went out of Eden. In this book, which last time I mentioned, explains basically in a nutshell, I'm going to say a little bit of what it says, that the like I said, men represents the intellect, and the woman represents the emotions. The tree of good and evil is connected here with what in Hebrew is called dimion, meaning imagination. And just a second. While the tree of life, in this interpretation that I'm mentioning right now, represents the true values of Yahweh. So remember, as I have explained in other instances, that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is basically the Torah, because the Torah says what is good and what is bad, what we should do and what we should not do, regardless of how one thing may feel, because that's basically why most people end up sinning, and is actually part of what came to be because of the fact that man ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is what I want to explain right now. So it is funny that Yahushua came to give us eternal life, being hung from a tree to become the tree of life, who shows us the true values of Yahweh, meaning shows us the true interpretation of the knowledge of good and evil, the true interpretation of the Torah. Because when people read the Torah without the tree of life, read the Torah without the truth, without the true values that Yahweh intended to give through that knowledge, people end up following their imagination and end up being fooled by their hearts, deceived by their hearts, by their imagination, and end up doing wrong because it may feel good in the flesh for a moment or whatever. The fact that Yahweh made a woman subjected to the men was also to show that the emotions need to be subjected to the intellect. Basically, that which is abstract needs to be subjected to that which is absolute. No matter what we may feel, we need to control it by that which we know to be true. And how do we know what is true? By reading the scriptures. We know that Yahushua is the truth, and therefore everything that he did and everything that he said is the manual in order for us to act according to the will of Yahweh. So that is also the reason why Satan decided to go to the woman. Satan, acting as the Yetzer Hara, or the inclination to evil. Remember that the 4 levels in which Yahweh creates are Atzilut, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. Emanation, creation, formation, and action. The third that I mentioned from going down is Yetzirah. The Yetzer Hara is basically the formation of evil. The Yetzer Hara is what ended up entering men when they ate of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil by listening to the snake, which represented the Yetzer Hara in the outside, which came to talk to Eve, who did not have an inclination to do evil, yet until she ate from the tree, she received the knowledge to also do evil. In that moment is when the Yetzer Hara entered the flesh that Adam and Eve received. So, it is that inclination to do evil that entered the flesh of man when we ate from the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. It is that which creates evil in this world. That is the answer which to the question that most atheists or even believers have regarding why there is so much evil in the world. Because of the formation of evil that is in the flesh. It is man who creates evil by the desires of the heart, by the imagination, the machinations, as Yahweh puts it in scriptures. So the serpent came through the emotions, trying to get humanity, in this case represented by the woman, to take from the tree, to take from that knowledge, to take from imagination and put it before the intellect. And it is as when basically, like I have been saying, is we need to subject our imagination to the intellect, that which we may be feeling to that which is true. Because if it were to be the other way around, then it would get very dangerous. It would be very problematic. And that is why, for instance, as an example, there are many issues in many relationships. For instance, with jealousy. Let's say a woman doesn't know where her husband is. She doesn't know where her husband is. And if she knows to be a fact that he is a good man because he has been trustworthy, and he has, or if he has done anything wrong, he has repented and done right, etc., whatever. If she knows that he's a righteous husband, she should think about that instead of letting her imagination fly because of whatever feeling she may be getting that he may not be answering the phone, for instance. So if he is not answering the phone and she sticks to the intellect, to the truth, to the absolute, instead of the feelings, she should say, using also the feelings, using also the imagination, should say, oh, he's a working man, he should be working. Or he told me he was going to be here. He may not be able to get to the phone. Instead of letting the imagination run free and start making up stories that the subconscious may have taken from TV, soap operas, stuff like that. And that's just a simple example. Of course, there are many more examples that we could discuss. So that is why we need to subject the imagination to the intellect. And the imagination was being represented by the tree. The woman, the emotions, is more attracted to the imagination. That's why the serpent came to the woman, through the emotions, trying to get the emotions to get hold of the imagination as being more important than the truth, which was represented by the tree of life. So it says here, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, showing that it was the most important because it was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads. The name of the first is Pishon, that is it which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of the land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone, and the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasseth the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is Hidekel. That is it which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Ephrat. And Yahweh Elohim took the man and put him into the garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. To dress it and to keep it. Here, dress it and keep it. We all imagine, of course, the Garden of Eden as a paradise, because that's what it is. But the reason why it is that is because it is closer to Yahweh, to the Most High, to the Creator. Now, how that is manifested in that reality, we will see. But something that we should understand, because of the reality in which we were born and the scriptures that were given to us, and therefore the knowledge that was transmitted to us, then we should, for instance, see how the more spiritual a person gets, the more that person wants to be set apart from the world. Meaning, all of a sudden doesn't want to do the things that everybody's doing. Just doesn't feel it. Looks at the masses and thinks, why are they doing that? What is the point in this and that? Until all of a sudden gets to a point in which he or she feels pretty much alone in the world. And that's why the old scripture tells us that we are few, because that will happen to most of us. I'm not saying that if it didn't happen to you, you're not a chosen one. I'm not saying that. But that's why I said most of us. It's pretty, I think it's pretty normal when it comes to those who are looking for the Almighty. Even in different religions in which they may be following wrong doctrines, just the fact that they want to become more spiritual makes them stop doing stuff that what normally we call the world is doing. This Rambam says that paradise or Eden could have been pretty much like this reality. However, before Adam ate from the tree, he did not know what actually was good and what was bad, meaning what felt good and what felt bad. He didn't feel the need, for instance, to eat better tasting food. He didn't feel the need to have a super comfortable bed, because his needs were spiritual, were according to the truth. But when he ate from the tree of knowledge, from the tree of good of knowledge of good and evil, when he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, all of a sudden he attained another desire for those things which feel good, but may not actually have anything to do with truth. And that's when we start doing different things, like, for instance, getting under the yoke of a job because you want to have a bigger house and a more comfortable environment and a newer car, and you have to pay for those things. However, when all of a sudden you become more spiritual, you realize those things don't actually mean anything in the spiritual world. So you kind of stop thinking about attaining those things and start thinking about attaining knowledge, wisdom, of course, salvation. And when you do that, people that are in the world and just simply do not understand the spiritual look at you like you're crazy, because you're doing exactly the opposite of what they think that should be done in life to be successful. So basically, one could see the Garden of Eden as a reality just like this one. However, men did not have the knowledge or understanding that some things actually feel better than others, even if others are good or are better for you. So, in this case, when it says that Yahweh put Adam to dress it and to keep it, I'm gonna try and translate as fast as possible. It says, according to the opinion of Rabbeinu Abraham ben Harambam, the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, represented this state. Well, of course, it's talking about something previous, which I kind of mentioned in everything that I just explained. So everything will make sense in a little bit. The fact of being able to get the truth, which we have been mentioning, that truth that would come from the tree of life, is the reason why Yahweh, when he put the man in the garden, is telling us in this verse, Leovda ulesh leshomra, which is basically here to dress it and to keep it. Which means, another translation, work it and take care of it. Work it and take care of it. Like I mentioned, the work that man knows, that humanity knows, is the work that came from sin, from eating the tree of knowledge. The work, the yoke that man wants to get under, that which humanity wants to do in order to be able to afford the pleasures or luxuries of that which is good, according to that knowledge which came from that tree. In other words, this state in which the objective and the goal of life are clear, when we are in Messiah, when we are in the spiritual, when we eat from the tree of life, our goals, our objective is clear, is to become one with the Father through the Son, Yahushua. But like I said, when you decide to put the imagination before the intellect, that which feels good before that which is true, you end up dividing or going straight from the real way in which you should go. And that's why that way leads to death. And that is, it leads to death if you, once again, forget to keep in mind the truth. Is when you decide to discard the truth, because that good feeling that you may be getting from anything that may not be true is just captivating you and basically made you its slave, which is why sin is what makes people a slave, or people are slaves to sin, as scripture tells us. So here says, this state in which the objective and the goal of life are clear, that situation in which the intellect, the sechel, dominates the dimion, meaning in which the intellect dominates the imagination, we need to take care of it and work it to be able to keep it. We need to dress it and keep it. We need to work it and take care of it. So I just want to make that clear. Like I have explained in other studies, I don't remember if it was in English or in Spanish, but I have explained before that we should we should always be aware of our thoughts, our words, our actions at all times, even when we are alone. And not because Illuminati may be watching through every camera that is everywhere, but because Yahweh is watching every single thing you are thinking, saying, and doing. And that is not to put fear of hell or punishment in the hearts of those who hear me. That is to say, because if you want to please the Father, if you actually want to do His will, then you need to know that it is a thing of life. It is, once you make that decision, you have to live that life from that moment on. It's not about going to a church and then going home and privately start doing all kinds of sins, because then you're going to go to a church and everybody's going to see you with a Bible, and then you're going to go back to your house or to work and yell at every one of the employees or whatever. So we need, if we really, really are about the Father and about His Son, we really should watch our words, because it is written that we have the power of life and death in our mouth. So if we believe scriptures, then we believe that. And if we believe that, we should be careful, because we could kill somebody through our words. There are many ways in which that could happen through words. Then also it is written that we are going to be judged because of or through every word that we have spoken. Every single word that we have spoken is going to be accounted in judgment, and we're going to have to give account of it. We're going to have to respond for it, answer for it. So that is really important to understand. Yahushua also said that it is not what enters the man that makes him impure. It is what comes out of man, of the treasure of his heart. And like I said, the heart is connected to the emotions, and the emotions is what is attracted to letting the imagination run wild and take over the intellect. And that's why when the imagination of the heart is what man listens to, ends up being deceived by it. And that's why it is written that the heart is deceitful over all things. So that's why also society normally tells everybody, follow your heart, follow your heart. Because the imagination of the heart is going to lead everybody to the desires of the flesh, to the most earthly reality that may be possible, to the lowest realm possible, while following the truth, the intellect, over the desires of the heart will lead us to the Father. So we need to take care and work hard to keep, to maintain the relation between the imagination and the intellect, being the imagination subject to the intellect. Always the intellect having dominion over the imagination. That's what one of the interpretations from this verse that we're seeing here about Yahweh putting Adam in the garden to dress it and to keep it. Because like I said, one translation is to work it. However, work had not been given to man because he had not sinned yet. And that was part of the curse that fell on humanity because of that sin, or the punishment. In verse 5, it said, there was not a man to till the ground. There was not a man to till the ground. So when Yahweh put Adam in the garden to work it and to keep it, or to dress it and to keep it, was not to till the ground. because Yahweh had a method to water the plants in the beginning, at least. So my point is that the work that Adam had to do was not a physical work like the work that Adam had to do after eating the fruit of knowledge. That's why part of what was said to him was that he was going to have to bring bread or eat the fruit of the ground through the sweat of his forehead, meaning through actual physical work. The work that is being mentioned here is spiritual work. It is mental work. It is the work that every single person should be doing every single day of their lives, dressing and keeping their minds so that their hearts, the imagination, may not lead them to iniquity, to, to all types of sin. For instance, it's normal when a person lets their flesh take control. Whatever feeling of pleasure they had through the little that they did in the beginning, all of a sudden is not enough. So they need imagination in order to feel a little bit more of pleasure doing that which they know is bad. And that is how they end up doing all sorts of things that for many people are just unbelievable. And I say many because unfortunately in this world that we are living it's actually more common that we may want to accept. But it is because of this that we are talking about. The fact that men wanted to have the taste of the knowledge of evil, having then the ability to create evil, having the yetzerara, the formation of evil. So we are to keep it and to dress it, take care of it, to maintain that relation, the sechel, having domain over the dimion, over the imagination. The working, the fact of working the garden means to think and analyze everything that we do. If this act, this effort, this investment of time is something that is accepted by the intellect or something that is being put in the heart by the imagination. We need to work on that every day. And we need to take care of it. Meaning to put special attention to taking care of that relation that I already mentioned in order not to fall in the abyss in which the imagination can immerse us. Like I said, if you let the imagination control, it will lead you to a dark alley, very dark, even the abyss, even in moments in which the intellect is weakened. So there are moments in which the intellect is weak and the imagination is going to try and take over. That is the moment when we are to watch out, to keep it, to be careful, to keep the control over the imagination, over the heart. What is the message of the meanings of the rivers in the garden? Pishon is the first. Then comes the name Havila. Then comes the name Gihon. Then Kush, which means black. Then the name Hidekel. So the meanings of the names, one after the other, would be, starting with Pishon. I just want to make sure. Yep. Pishon means increase, or water poured forth, overflowing. So the overflow or the increase of the circle. Remember that scriptures tells us that Yahweh, when he made earth, he made it in a circle. He first made a circle. He stands over the circle of the earth, says the book of Yeshayahu or Isaiah. Kehila means circle. Normally the word that is in those verses that I just mentioned is chuk. Here we have Kehila, meaning circle. So it can represent creation itself, the lower part, earth. So the overflow or the increase of the circle, the increase of creation. Just with that, we could understand that it would be from these rivers that the overflow of earth, of the circle of the earth, would come, and the increase of the fruits of the land. Then it comes Gihon, which means bursting forth. So the increase or overflow of the circle of the earth is bursting forth. In chapter 2, creation. Then comes Kush, which means black. One thing that could be said here, for instance, is that when Elohim created the earth, the heavens and the earth, scripture says then that darkness covered the face of the deep, and darkness looks black. So the increasing overflow of the circle of the earth bursting forth from blackness. Remember also we have discussed how hue men could be translated as men of color, and how the original men basically did not have white skin like most people think because of Hollywood. It was made from the dust of the ground, and normally the ground is dark. So just that should be something to think about. So that is also another way of seeing it, as from this word which means black, kush. So the increase of the circle of the earth bursting forth from the blackness rapidly, which is the name of Hidekel. Ashur or Assyria is a step. So rapidly, step by step. Then comes Perath, which means fruitfulness. So the rivers, I'm going to read it in trying to get two different meanings. Maybe we get the same one in both. Which would be the physical reason for those rivers. And that would be to bring the increase over the circle of the earth by bursting forth from the deep which would be black, rapidly, step by step, like in nature, the different summer, winter, the different seasons, bringing step by step, rapidly, the fruitfulness. So those rivers, Yahweh made so that those rivers would go through all the world to bring fruitfulness. In a spiritual sense, we understand that Eden means pleasure, is paradise. It was a higher reality connected to the Father. So these rivers can be understood as what water, or the way water is mentioned in scriptures. For instance, Yahushua is the water of life. So it has to do with the spirit of life. Also, it has to do with spirit of truth, teaching, blessing, like the waters of the rain, the former and the latter rain, first and last. So water is a blessing. It's coming from paradise itself and going down to all the earth. And I say down because rivers normally go down, right? So that's why I have mentioned the two interpretations of what this reality, Eden, would be. Since that which is in Sheol and is paradise for those who are righteous and are in there is what Yahushua himself called Abraham's bosom, where Abraham is waiting for resurrection and everything. While here, the rivers, once again I repeat, normally go down. So that would mean Eden was elevated. So when a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads. So the other reading of the meanings of the names would be, and the overflow or increase of creation, the circle of the earth, will burst forth from darkness or from blackness rapidly. Like in the end times, Yahweh will, like Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk says it, and other prophets say it, when Yahweh finally decides to act in the end times, is going to be quick. A lot of people are going to be talking about how never the end times are never going to come, how Yahweh is taking forever, whatever. But when Yahweh decides to act, he's going to do it rapidly, like a thief in the night. You know, when a thief comes, well, that thief may never come in the name of Yahushua to our homes, but when a thief enters a house, he does everything as fast as possible. Well, there are some nowadays that actually even fall asleep in the couch and everything, but a smart thief actually goes fast through the house. So when we understand, as Yahushua said, that the end is in the beginning, if we have the mindset that even if we are reading the second chapter of the entire scriptures talking about the beginning of creation, understanding how perfect scriptures are, then we should understand that Yahweh is talking to us who are in the end through the stories of the beginning. So the names of the rivers could be understood as the coming fulfillment of the prophecies that are sent from the heavens. And therefore, in that case, with that mindset, the increase, the blessing of the circle of the earth will burst forth from blackness, from darkness, like all of a sudden, when nobody's expecting it, even from people who nobody expects, rapidly, in a moment, rapidly, step by step, according to the scriptures, according to the prophecies given through Yahweh by the Navim, to bring fruitfulness, obviously, to those who have been expecting Messiah, expecting Yahweh's blessing and promises. 15. And Yahweh Elohim took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And Yahweh Elohim commanded the man, commanded Adam, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. Here, just like if we were to first take that verse and really think about it, really read it, we need to understand Yahweh does not make mistakes. If you know that a human lawyer, that a lawyer in our reality knows how to write a contract in small letter in order to make a person sign away their life or whatever, and you know how lawyers act, and well, the courts in this world, in which they basically, if they are able to interpret the law that the government wrote in a way in which favors one who is guilty, they will use it to get the guilty one out so that the lawyer can get paid. So my point is that the way a contract is written is very important, and every word is there for a reason, and therefore a person that wants to understand what is signing, what is agreeing to, should really pay attention to each and every word that is being said. So in that case, we are reading this verse, and it says, and Yahweh Elohim commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. Right there, that is free will. Of every, he didn't say of almost every tree. He didn't say of 99% of the trees. He didn't say of most of the trees. He said of every tree. Once again, it's like the third or fourth time. And we are just on the second chapter. And it's like the fourth, I repeat, or the third time that Yahweh said that all plants, all trees are good for eating. That's why Yahweh made them. And now he's saying of every tree you shall freely eat. Now he's just going to add the law in order for free will to be fully established. Meaning that in free will you need to have choice. But if everything is free, or if there is no law to obey, then there is also no execution of that free will. So it was all part of creation, being free will one of the main reasons to make men. So first, Yahweh tells men, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. So it is as Yahweh is saying, you can eat of it because you have free will. But you shall not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. So this can be interpreted in two ways. First, which is what I think is how mostly is interpreted most of the time, as saying But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, because if you eat of it, you're going to die. That's simple. Yeah, it's a literal interpretation and it's valid completely, of course. But once again, I repeat, why are the words in that way? Like in this case, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. That is like the first part. Then, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Yahweh is not saying, because if you eat, you will die. He's saying, because the day you eat, you will die. So Yahweh himself is saying that men will eat of it and die. It's part of the commandment itself. It's prophesying that men will eat. And like I said, right now we are seeing that the commandment is given to the men, to Adam. Yes, we know that in one interpretation, or one way of seeing things, not to call it an interpretation, Hava, Eve, was right there next to him, because in the physical sense, for instance, some believe that Hava was actually like next to Adam, like the other face, the back of Adam was not a back, was actually the front of Hava, for instance. So she was there the whole time, but since it was only one body, it was called Adam. And that's why when Adam was created, it says in scriptures that male and female, he made them. So that is one way of seeing it physically. Like, if we really need to understand that Hava was there the whole time physically. Okay. But another way of seeing it, a little bit maybe more spiritual, is that the soul of Hava, which is half of Adam, was still attached to the individual Adam, Nefesh, inside the one body. When Yahweh decided to take the side and open the body and then put flesh in it, as it is, or it could be translated, it will be basically Yahweh taking the soul that was Hava from the part of the soul of Adam and separating them, and then making a new body for that part of the soul of Adam, that being Hava. In a way, like when a man puts his seed in a woman, and part of his soul, part of him, is going in that seed and then being conceived and becoming another person. If we understand it this way, that Adam was one and Hava was inside of him, yet to be manifested. The potential of Hava was there the whole time since Adam was created, but the actualization of Hava, or the manifestation of Hava as an individual, had not come to be, because that moment had not been mentioned, which is when Yahweh opens the side of Adam to take out Hava. So I hope this is clear, because if we understand that in this moment Hava was inside of the soul of Adam and only Adam was listening to the commandment, then we can understand that when Hava came, Adam had to tell her the commandment that Elohim gave him previously, because Yahweh gave him the commandment, and then Yahweh himself, Yahweh gives the commandment not to eat of the tree. Right after, he says that it is not good for men to be alone. So that means that he was alone when the commandment was given. He was alone when the commandment was given. So Hava was inside of him. The potential of Hava was in him. He heard the commandment. After the commandment, Yahweh says, it's not good for men to be alone. Why would Yahweh, if Yahweh knows all things and he knew that it was going to be Hava, or Eve, who would make men eat of the tree, if Yahweh knew that, why the next thought after don't eat of the tree would be, I'm going to make Chava. That makes no sense. Unless we can make a separation between the literal, the spiritual, the physical, and the heavenly. Yahweh and Elohim. If you want to interpret the physical, like if you really need to interpret the physical or take the physical sense of, like I have mentioned, that he rested, that he didn't know where Adam was, that he didn't know that the serpent had given Chava the fruit, that he didn't know that Chava would eat of the fruit right after she was created, and that he would think about making Chava right after he had given the commandment. So there are many things that if you look at it with a worldly mindset, you're gonna say, oh, he made a lot of mistakes. And I say that because I've heard it from a lot of people. And not only atheists, a lot of Christian famous pastors have said that for instance, Kenneth Copeland and others have said that the greatest failure in scriptures, as they call them, is God. Because he lost the first man, the first woman, the first angel, not understanding what all of that means. The reasons for each and every one of those events. So, in this case, like I said, we need to see what is being said. Yahweh is saying you can eat of every tree. Eat of every tree. However, don't eat of this one because when you eat of it, you will die. So Yahweh is saying you will eat of it. But remember, I told you not to eat of it. Because when you come to tell me that it feels bad to know evil, you will need to remember that it was your choice to live that reality. It was your choice to know evil. It was your choice to taste it. I told you not to do it, but I gave you free will to do so. And that is the key. Yahweh is good. He allowed us to learn through experience. And it was part of the plan. But he didn't want to force us to do something. He wanted us to choose it. And that's why Yahweh said, I have to make the woman. So, and Yahweh Elohim commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I find it very interesting that the verse is 17. As I have mentioned before also, the verses in chapters were added later. Originally, scriptures, when they were written, they were not written in chapters and verses. That was added later. However, I do believe that Yahweh is so mighty that he can put messages in those type of things that came later. And for instance, in this case, it is funny that the word Tob in Hebrew is translated as good. Tob is good. And the word is formed using the letters Tet and Bet. Tet, Vav, and Bet, which would be 9, 6, and 2. So the value of the word top, the value of the word good is 17. Verse 17 says, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. There is a book, and I'm not going to mention a lot of it because I want to avoid certain things, but in which it basically explains and it's one of the books that they call Gnostic books, just in case. Explains how Yahweh actually intended for men to eat of the tree. Yahweh, the highest creator, the highest Elohim. However, the serpent, when the serpent came to talk to Chava, the serpent was not doing it for the right reasons. The serpent was not um, going according to the will of the Father. Meaning, the serpent was not acting because she knew that Yahweh wanted men to eat. The serpent was acting according to her or its own will. And I say her because in Spanish, that word is female. And also, like I have explained in Hebrew, as in Spanish, the words are female and male, unlike in English. So, the serpent was doing it because the serpent wanted humanity to be under it, under its power, under its dominion. However, it was part of the entire will of the Father because of what would come afterwards. So, in that book, it says how Messiah was right there next to the tree, or the Spirit of Truth was right next to it, like in the shape of an eagle. Like, for instance, like the four shapes that are around the throne: the eagle, the ox, the lion, and the man, the cherubim, represent the four missions or ministries of Messiah. The ox represents him as the servant, the lion him as the king, the man him as the son of man, and the eagle as the envoy of Yahweh, the messenger, the malach, the angel. So I think of that book and that verse. I think that is very interesting. It's the only book where I have read that. But I do find it very interesting because I think it confirms many things that I have read in Judaism. Obviously, with a different opinion or conclusions or whatever, because they don't believe in the Messiah, Yahushua. But it is because in this book that I was reading, they explain how the serpent was basically the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to do evil that was outside of men. But once they ate of the knowledge of good and evil, the Yetzer Hara entered and now was in the flesh. But not only that, also the inclination to do good, the Yetzer Hatob, because he was the Etz of knowledge, Da'at, of Tob, and Ra, good and evil. So the fact that this book says that Messiah was next to it while the serpent was talking to Hava, once Hava ate, is as if these two powers, the inclination to do evil and the inclination to do good, enter humanity. And that is what we need to understand, because normally we only focus on the fact that is the knowledge of evil, but it's also the knowledge of good. So it is important to have the knowledge of good. It is important to know what is actually good. It is important to know because, as we know, Yahweh is the only one that is good. So if we have the knowledge of good according to the truth, that means we know the Father. But if we do not have the truth, the tree of life, and only have the knowledge of good and evil in this reality, are going to end up following the imagination, trying to get to feel the pleasures of the flesh. So, let's see. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. The commandment, while at the same time the prophecy that they would eat. Also, I already explained many things I know, but I think certain things are needed to be understood very well. In this case, in Hebrew, it has the word die twice. As we read in the book of Revelation, in after the 1,000 years, after the millennium, when the last judgment comes, the scripture says that those who are thrown in the lake of fire are those who are dying the second death. Verse 14 says, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. As we just read, death itself is being killed. Death itself is being thrown in the lake of fire. Death is going through the second death. That means the second death is the real death. The death that is being killed in this moment is the illusion of death, which is what is experienced in this reality. What humanity knows as death is just an illusion which will be thrown in the lake of fire during the second death, which is the actual. Just like this life is like a dream, in the sense that it's an illusion. But when we enter eternal life, we will realize that that is the actual reality. And is not compared to this one in anything. Even though there are going to be similar things when it comes to the reality, the feeling, the power, the greatness, and other things just not going to be comparable. So, this is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So people who die in this world and lived according to the desires of their flesh, Satan, and all of that, when they come to the judgment, they will be thrown in the lake of fire, which is the second death. Here we are seeing, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt with death die. They translate it as surely die. With death you will die. Or it could be translated, you will die in this world, and you could die in the second. You could die in this world, and you could also die eternally by being thrown in the lake of fire. It was already being said here, because the knowledge of evil can bring men all the way to that. And that is what we need to understand. However, Yahweh opened a way for Yahushua, the tree of life, 2,000 years ago, so that humanity could accept Messiah in order to only accept the knowledge of good, being that the Father, through the way which is Messiah, instead of the evil which this world offers, which this flesh makes appealing somehow. So, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And Yahweh Elohim said, it is not good that the man should be alone. Why? Why would he say that? If the coming creation will be the one that will make us eat of the tree, why would Yahweh say that it is not good? That is to show that it was meant to happen. Even though it would bring a lot of pain, it was meant to happen. For instance, and I know that this was also a result of it, but when a woman is pregnant, she goes through a lot of things that are uncomfortable. But when the baby comes, all of a sudden, all of that is almost forgotten. Well, it's forgotten. Because there is a baby. There's the biggest blessing that a person can get in this world. So all of a sudden, all that pain you realize was worth it, because you all of a sudden have a huge blessing, a baby, another person, a life. So that's part of the thing, to get to know a higher blessing by getting to also understand what pain, and in this case evil, is. If we didn't, if we had not come to this reality, we would not be able to appreciate the other reality. If we had not come to know evil, we would not be able to appreciate the truth. We would not be able to appreciate Yahweh, and would be spoiled brats. Humanity, or, well, unfortunately, many people in humanity are. But I mean, what Yahweh had planned for humanity, meaning the chosen few and the many, even those who are justified by their belief. If we had not gone as a nation through what we have gone through, if this reality had not existed, then humanity would be like normally a spoiled brat is, because we would not know what pain is. We would not know what lacking something is. We would not know the gift of the favor of Yahweh. We would not know the importance of keeping a love, keeping the fire, keeping and dressing the garden. So it is important. Like I said, you can tell a kid, don't touch the oven because you will get burned. And a kid knows, but he hasn't experienced it. So he actually doesn't know. He has the knowledge of it, but he doesn't have the understanding. Once he gets burned, he understands why you were telling him not to touch it. So that's why normally people do not learn from other people's mistakes, because they believe it won't happen to them, because they believe they're smarter than most. When he finished creation, he said that everything was good. Everything was good. Now we see that Yahweh saying it is not good, as if something changed. And that is part of the argument that some used to say that there was a previous female creation before Hava, who came from inside of Adam, that whom they call Lilith, or scriptures itself call Lilith in Yeshayahu 34. So she did not want to be subjected to Adam because she was made from a different piece of clay. So she left, in just a few words, and became the mother of the demons, according to the story that is attached to that name. And that is why Yahweh then looked at man and said, it is not good for him to be alone. Because everything was good. All of a sudden, he was alone, and that was not good. So, and Yahweh Elohim said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. Also, when it comes to what I was explaining regarding how man represents the intellect, the abstract, and the woman represents the emotions. I mean, the intellect, the absolute, and the woman represents the emotions, the abstract. It is showing how intellect by itself is not good. Just using the intellect without having emotions without having feelings, without using those feelings. And therefore, the imagination that um, it's also needed, as I have explained before, when it comes to prophecy. Um, the fact that, as we are about to see, Adam saw all the animals and none of them was a good fit for him, because he saw, well, there's a female for every animal, but there's not a female for men. That is also to understand that from all the attributes or the qualities that are in a man, in the flesh, which happens to be like the desires of animals, none of them can be a helper to the intellect. None of them can help the intellect as the emotions, as the feelings. So that's why it was not good for the intellect to be alone. It was not good for men to be alone. I'm going to translate once again. The whole sense or reason for which we cover ourselves is not to succumb to the impulse. If we were not to use clothes, the problem would be that we would be way too immersed in the world of pleasure. So one would ask, what is bad about that? Or even, let anybody do whatever they want. Like, for instance, the law of Telema, which is the law that was given to Aleister Crowley, who is called the wickedest man in the world in that time, the Beast 666, as he liked to be called. He said he wrote the law of Telema, which is the main law of several secret societies, which is do what thou wilt, being that the whole of the law. So it says here, let anybody do what they want. What is the problem? The problem is that man is different from animals because he has the capacity to reason. Man has the capacity to attain supreme truths. That is something that animals do not have. Therefore, if man is immersed in the world of pleasure, it would be downgrading itself to the level of animals, basically. For instance, in the beginning, Adam would be with Chava, not because of pleasure, but because the intellectual thought regarding is it good to bring more kids to the world or not. Well, once they ate from the tree, of course, the thought was, is it good to have sex because it feels it says good. Here, the serpent represents the Yetzerara, the inclination to do evil. The negative part of the imagination. That's why I was mentioning how Messiah was represented by an eagle, just like Satan by the serpent. And when the tree of knowledge of good and evil, basically, which represents imagination of good and evil, because at the end, well, there's so much I want to say. Like we read in Romans, if you believe something is bad, so if you imagine something is bad and you do it, you are sinning. Therefore, there we should understand how there is a connection, direct connection between the imagination and what is actually good and evil. We should judge according to the truth, not according to feelings, because that's when everything gets twisted. So, the serpent represents the Yetzerara, the negative part of the imagination. And like I said, that is why man is the one who creates evil in this world, because Yetzer means the formation of evil. It is man with the imagination who ends up doing good or bad. This is also important. Don't forget that the world in which the serpent lives is the earth. It's not a bird. It's actually an animal that needs to drag itself everywhere. So it represents the lowest of the lowest level. This means that the kingdom of the Yetzerara are the earthly things. That's why it also is written in scriptures that Satan has his eyes in the things of men. Satan, as the serpent, the desires of the serpent are the lowest of the lowest. And that's why when a man wants to follow Satan, ends up acting as they do. The tree of good and evil represents imagination in general, and that is why touching it was not prohibited. What man was not supposed to do was eat it. That means that we can touch the imagination, we can use the imagination. It is needed for many things, but we should not let it control our lives, control the intellect. So it represents imagination in general, and that is the reason why we were allowed to touch it, but not to eat of it. Touch it means use it. Eat means to immerse yourself in the imagination, to let yourself be controlled by it and not by the intellect. That means to run towards that which is nice, comfortable, instead of that which is true or correct. Adam represents the intellect, the woman represents pleasure. Now, let me see. Actually, this is explaining how men and women were created physically according to the Jewish tradition as one next to the other, and then they were separated. Here it is, the one I was looking for. Now we can understand when it says, it is not good for man to be alone. This means it is not ideal to only have the intellect, because we also need the imagination. It says here, it means that which represents or is represented by the woman as that which is represented by the man, both build two capacities that the humankind, both men and women, have. And that's why this story talks about both male and female, meaning that the fact that I'm talking here about what women represents and what the male represents, we need to understand that they started as one, because both men and female have both intellect and imagination, or intellect and emotions. The connection between the imagination and the emotions, it is what made the serpent come to the female and not to the men, because the female would be attracted to it, the men would not. And So it says here, when it comes to it is not good for men to be alone, it is not ideal for men only to use the intellect, because he needs the imagination, using it correctly in order to achieve prophecy, which is the ideal state. Afterwards, if the man grows spiritually and comes to a level, they mention, for instance, Moshe, he can stop using the imagination, but in the beginning, it is necessary under the total dominion of the intellect in order to achieve prophecy. And that's why it is said eser kenegdo, which is a helpmeet for him, which means a help for the intellect. A help for the intellect in order to achieve higher levels of understanding, like prophecy, that one would not be able to achieve only by the intellect, because it would only be stuck to the what can be seen or what seem logical, because I do believe that the spiritual is completely logical, but it needs to be seen with spiritual eyes. So it is interesting to know that before Elohim had given Adam his eser kenegdo, or his helpmeet, it says that the man had looked among all the creatures of the garden and did not find an eser kenegdo. This represents that all the capacities that a man has, the best that can help the intellect in order to attain superior truths as prophecy, is the imagination. So it says here, and Yahweh Elohim said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. Eser kenegdo. And out of the ground Yahweh Elohim formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. It is a book. There is a book that says that Yahweh wanted to show the angels, who thought that man was not a good creation, thought that man was nothing. And that is something that we kind of see in some verses of scriptures, like when in David in Psalm says that angels had said to Yahweh, "What is man that you think about him? What is man that you actually listen to him?" So to the angels, humanity is nothing, because angels cannot understand the greatness that Yahweh put in these vessels of clay. Some angels do, of course, those who have not rebelled, of course. But the angels who do not understand the plan of Yahweh have decided to use humanity, and that's why they have created so many different false doctrines and whatever, in order to receive the worship of men and everything from men. So in one of the books that I have been mentioning, it says that Yahweh wanted to show angels the power that he had put in men. So that's why he made Adam give name to each of the animals, because that was something that none of the angels had been able to do. None of the angels had enough knowledge or wisdom to give name to each of the animals. So he called Adam, and Adam was able to do it, obviously through the wisdom that Yahweh had given him, because he is the image and likeness of Yahweh, something that the angels did not comprehend. So when out of the ground Yahweh Elohim formed every beast of the field. So we see that from the ground he made the beasts. That's why this body, physical, material body that was made from the ground, is like the flesh of animals. However, that is just the vehicle. It is just the material that the Father used to make different vehicles for different types of souls. Because the soul that is in men is different, and that's why flesh and blood will not inherit the kingdom. Because the flesh is part of this lower reality. The flesh is animal, as we are seeing. Animals were also made from the ground. And out of the ground, Yahweh Elohim formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. To see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. So are names important? Of course they are important. Yahweh wanted to see what Adam would call every single creature. And that, doing that, was an expression of wisdom, knowledge which the angels themselves did not have. So Yahweh gives names and then gives the authority to men to give names to the creatures. And it is believed, it is said that Adam gave to each and every animal not only the Hebrew name that that animal would have, but the name in each and every language that would exist in the world. So for instance, Caleb means dog. So he named Caleb dog, perro, and other words that are in the different languages of the world. He gave the different names that every language would call each of the animals. And that is the name thereof. He gave names according to their qualities. Mainly in Hebrew. Is amazing. The names of the animals, how they show the qualities of the animals, the main reason why they were created, the part that they fulfill in creation, different aspects of the animals are encapsulated in their names, in Hebrew mainly, of course. So that is very interesting also to see, because one would think that naming an animal would be just putting letters together to make up a word. But actually the name means the whole. Basically a name, like I said, encapsulates what the animal itself, or an entire creation, represents, does, reason for being created, all of that in one word. Imagine how much wisdom one would have to make one word that would encapsulate one creation. And that is the importance of names, because then we have the name which Yahweh decided to give to himself, and also through the Son, Yahweh, Yahushua, and the importance of those names because of the meanings of them. So we're going to close it here for tonight.